and we're proud to be driving Denver's culture of innovation and entrepreneurship forward. Entrepreneurs are the heartbeat of a city, and never do we see the power of this innovation more than when our city and our community faces challenging times. Our growing startup community is a passionate group of leaders who have positioned Denver as one of the best cities to start a business with the second highest rate of entrepreneurship in the entire country. And we're proud co-founders of Denver Startup Week, a week-long celebration of all things entrepreneurial, and an immersive showcase of our city's remarkable startup environment. Our city is one for innovators, for collaborators, and for trailblazers, a place where entrepreneurs from all corners of the world are starting and growing successful businesses. Nowhere is our city's unique spirit of collaboration more evident than at Denver Startup Week. So, on behalf of the Downtown Denver Partnership and our downtown business community, I thank you. I thank you for joining us for the largest free entrepreneurial event of its kind. And I invite you to immerse yourself in all the week has to offer visionaries such as yourself. Entrepreneurs will help us come through this moment stronger than before. Thank you for being a part of Denver's story.
Hi, Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and a co-founder of Denver Startup Week. I hope you're having an incredible week of great content, conversation, connections. Welcome to How Social Media and Online Engagement is Shaping Our World, a conversation with Dick Costolo and Rachel Carlson. This is a topic that continues to be timely as we see celebrities making a point to leave social channels, at least for a day, while the US government and Oracle, I'll let that sink in, broker a deal for the hottest social media platform of the moment. Our moderator is one of Denver's biggest success stories. I've had the pleasure of introducing her at multiple Denver Startup Weeks, and each time I think she's added a comma to her company's valuation. Rachel Carlson is the CEO and co-founder of Guild Education, one of Denver's most recent unicorns, and one of the few female-led companies to reach unicorn status in 2019. Rachel has created an enduring company to partner with some of the most innovative leaders at Fortune 500 companies, including Walmart and Disney, who subscribe to the concept of conscious shareholder capitalism and the idea of doing well by doing good. The work they're doing with Guild not only positively impacts their bottom line, but also allows them to upskill their workforces and prepare them for the work of the future. Denver Startup Week, here's Rachel Carlson.
Thanks, Ben. It's really kind of you, and I'm really honored to be joined for this conversation. Let me start by sharing how thrilled I am to welcome Dick Costolo to our stage virtually here today. We wish we were hosting you in Denver, but we'll hope we get to have you come visit us at some other time. I'll start by introducing you a bit, but welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So for those of you joining us, so Dick was named one of the 10 most influential US tech CEOs, and he certainly is. He's been a leader as a digital entrepreneur, a business executive, and an improvisational, had to get that word out, comedian, all to deliver a powerful message that I find really inspiring about the future of social media, the internet, and the role of technology. As mentioned, he's a digital entrepreneur who's launched a series of highly successful ventures that I hope we'll get to learn a little bit more about today. And he was the CEO of Twitter in 2010 all the way through 2015, where I've heard you share that you realized you were helping run more than just a digital platform. It was a tool to collapse regimes and a tool that gave a powerful voice to the unempowered and created a new way for many organizations and businesses to connect. So excited to have that conversation with you here today and also learn about your current work as an investor and advisor with 01 Advisors, and just thrilled to welcome you to the stage. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. You can ask me, as I told you beforehand, you can ask me anything you want to ask me. I'm happy to talk about it.
Great. I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah,
Well, let's start with, as a Denver native and proud member of the Colorado startup community for myself, I want to start with that theme a little bit, that this is Denver Startup Week, and hear a little bit from you about your impressions of technology and startup communities outside of Silicon Valley. I know you started a successful company in Chicago and then for a variety of reasons moved it to Silicon Valley, but would be curious to start by hearing your thoughts about the growth of entrepreneurship beyond the Valley.
Yeah, sure. So let's see, I have a bunch to say about that. First of all, my startup Feedburner, we didn't move until until after we were acquired by Google. So we were in Chicago the whole time, and we're able to be very successful there. I've got a lot of experience with Denver and the Boulder area because Brad Feld at Foundry was one of our first investors, Feedburner, way back in 2004. So he and I have known each other forever, and I've been familiar with the scene out there. I think that if the one interesting thing about the pandemic for entrepreneurs in the United States is that it's more clear than ever to venture capitalists that you don't need to be in the Bay Area to be successful. I think that previously you saw lots of companies started or anywhere around the world, and then the sort of the VCs would pull those founders or the founding teams out to the Bay Area. There was, every year you'd run into 20, 30, 40 people who had founded great companies, Benchmark or Index or someone had funded, and they convinced them to move to the Bay Area because you had to be there to get the right talent. That's just no longer the case, and it happened very, very quickly. In fact, we are working with and invested in a company in Austin, Texas, Literati, that's led by Jess Ewing, who I used to work with at Google way back in the day. And pre-COVID, Jess had a hard time convincing people to move to Austin, and now she not only has an easier time convincing people to move to Austin, it's also the case that they don't even need to be in Austin. So I think that change has dramatically accelerated and will no longer, I think, ever be the case again that you have to be in the Bay Area to be able to be successful, or that VCs will even ask you to do that.
That's exactly what my follow-up question was going to be. We're seeing that in COVID, and candidly, from Guild's perspective, we've been quite fortunate. We moved the company here, but we've raised $225 million, never a dime in Denver, oddly enough. We tried. We just kept raising money from other cities. But I'd be curious, it sounds like you think post-COVID, this trend is here to stay, and entrepreneurs will be able to build their business in whatever city makes sense for them and fundraise beyond those city walls.
Yeah, I think, and there are a bunch of reasons for that, because it's become obvious to executives, investors, et cetera, that you can be productive outside the office. At least for some number of people and in some industries, you can be productive outside the office. That has really shaken the belief that, look, this remote work is, nonsense, and you have to be, all 100% of the people have to be consolidated in order to be successful. That belief is, I think, gone. And then you couple that with, to be quite frank, San Francisco is not the city it was 4 or 5 years ago. It's a combination of local politics and challenges within the local political sphere, and the incredible, the tax rates in California. And the city's just waste. It's got a $12 billion budget for 800,000 people, and literally nothing works. Compare that to a city like Florence, Italy, where there's a $1 billion equivalent of $1 billion budget for 500,000 people, and things are great. And it's just, you're seeing a lot of flight from the city. Someone informed me yesterday, rates for U-Haul trucks from San Francisco to Austin, Texas are $4,500 a truck, and rates from U-Haul trucks from Austin, Texas to San Francisco are $1,000. So, simple supply and demand equation on rental trucks for movers would tell you that people are leaving San Francisco in droves.
That is an amazing data point and equation that tells the supply demand story so clearly.
Right.
Wow, that's fascinating. You mentioned Feedburner and your early, how you got to know Boulder through Brad, et cetera. It'd be really helpful to let the audience, especially since we have so many founders and folks representing younger companies, can we take it back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about the company and starting it and what your early entrepreneurial journey was like?
Yeah, the funny thing about having been a, CEO of multiple companies now is I've been on all sides of the fundraising equation, from, can't get a meeting with anyone to 92 people trying to lead the round in a Twitter round. So going back to Feedburner, when we started, we had this thesis back in 2004 that the publisher and subscriber model of content, where you had to go to a website to see that content, was going to go away. That was way before Twitter, obviously. Back in the day, it was RSS and RSS feeds and syndication. And our thesis was syndication is going to become more and more important. People are going to want to go to one place to see what's happening across a variety of news feeds. sort of pre-Facebook as well. And that's what Feedburner was. It was sort of a publisher clearinghouse for aggregating feeds and helping publishers monetize those. Everyone looked at us like we had, when you went around in 2004 and said, look, people are going to stop going to individual websites, to 19 different websites in the morning to see what's going on. It's all going to be aggregated through these feeds. People looked at us like we had two heads. Like, first of all, you can't do this in Chicago. Second of all, every publisher we talk to says that's not going to happen. But, when you're really disrupting a space in a way that people don't yet understand, of course they say that's not going to happen. I mean, one of my favorite Venn diagrams is, good ideas, the intersection of good ideas that look like bad ideas, at the time, was one of the best places to invest. And 3 years later, we had literally every RSS feed in the world that was from any reasonable publisher floating through us. But when you're grinding and trying to raise money, and it's just brutal, and then the VCs are constantly at, lots of people on this Zoom are probably nodding. They're always like, okay, keep us posted on next steps. And I'm like, no, the next step is I need money, like the next step is you right at that. And, like, who else is interested? And you're like, oh my God, and you get into that herd mentality stage where no one wants to invest unless someone else invests. And it's just a grind. And then, it's when you go from that to, trying to raise money for the Series D at Twitter and everyone's beating each other to, get a meeting with you. It's a great feeling, but it's, you just have to stick with it. The beauty of raising money as an entrepreneur is 19 people can say no. And when the 20th person says yes, you're funded. So just have to keep, banging on doors and going back to people and being that person that, puts things at the top of the VC's inbox every morning and, hey, repinging you on this. And eventually, if it's a decent idea and you grind away, you'll get there.
Yeah, I love that. Beyond your fundraising learnings in those early years, what's one of your one or two leadership and entrepreneur pieces of advice that you've held constant that have reinforced from your early days?
Oh man, we could run out the clock on this. We only have 45 more minutes, so you can just stop me. I'll do a couple. Let's see. The first one is I'll do an entrepreneur one and then one leadership one, and we can go on from there. The first one is I had this young guy came up to me in a Blue Bottle coffee shop like in 2016 or 2017, a year or two after I left Twitter. And he's like, hey, I'm so and so. I'm starting this company. We're just going into YC next week. If you could get me started around. I was talking to somebody and just interrupted me. I guess you could tell I was irritated because he said, if you could just give me one sentence of advice and then I'm gonna walk away from the table, what would it be? And right away I said, it's always hard. Like, just remember, it's always hard. Because as you know, from building a company that's raised that much money and as big as it is now, you're constantly in this mindset of, I just got to get a VP of marketing and then everything will be fine. We just have to fix our product engineering kicking things into production life cycle and then everything will be fine. And then, it's just constant, there's always a bunch of things on fire and you just have to start to learn to lead by forestry management instead of, now I got to put out this fire, now I got to put this fire. It's, becomes one of stepping back and doing forestry management and realizing it's always going to be hard. One of my favorite experiences ever as a CEO is I was invited to the CEO conference. And the problem is also, by the way, when you talk to other CEOs, they're like, great, how's it going? Great, it's going amazing, great, never better. And you're like, why am I the only one that's like grinding? And I went to the CEO conference and Ken Cheneau, the CEO of American Express, who was just killing it at the time, stood up and said, I want to talk about the basement. The basement is when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you press your head together. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to drive this 200-year-old company into the ground and bankrupt it. And I was like, oh, good. And everyone else around the table nodded. And it's all these successful, multi-billion-dollar CEOs. And I was like, oh, good. I'm not the only one who thinks that. So that's my advice.
Ken's on my board. So you're reminding me that the next time I feel in the basement, I'm just going to call Ken. Yeah,
right. Good. He's amazing. I love that guy. And then my second piece of management and leadership advice is I taught a management course at Twitter that was about 6 hours long because I wanted everyone to manage it consistently across the company and not be managing based on, I came from eBay and we do this, or I came from Google and we do that. And I started off the class by saying, look, if you take one thing away from the 6 hours, it's this: make sure everybody on the team understands what you understand. And I think that's like, and that boils a lot down that I went into a lot of depth on, but communication as a leader is the most important thing you can do to help your team understand where things stand, how to be productive in their work, what being productive in their work means for both them personally and the company. And there's nothing worse than, than not understanding how your work impacts the organization, or what the priorities are, or working up the courage to go tell management how screwed up as something is, and them denying there is a problem or defending the status quo. So make sure everybody on your team understands what you understand is probably my biggest piece of management advice.
I love that. And I'm gonna, I might, as we get further through your bio, come back and ask you a couple questions, because I know that leadership and management is something you spent a lot of time on as your career advanced. Do you mind, before we jump there, telling a little bit about the experience of selling Feedburner to Google, and sort of what that experience was from going from a smaller company to suddenly this massive organization that was one of the most preeminent technology companies in the world?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it was huge culture shock for a couple specific reasons. Because we had run the company in Chicago, I didn't really have a sense until we sold the company in 2007 of the level of engineering entitlement in Silicon Valley. And so we get acquired by Google. I remember I'll tell one specific story. We get acquired by Google, and we go out for this sort of first week of working with the folks at Google we're working with. I was working for Susan Wojcicki at the time, who's now the CEO of YouTube, obviously, but was at the time working on the ads products. I go out to spend a couple days with her, and then decide, look, I'm going to stay Friday and attend the all hands meeting that Google has every Friday called TGIF, where Larry and Sergey get up and answer questions from the company and talk about what's going on and talk about OKRs, et cetera. And it's sort of an open Q&A, and this big, huge what is their food, restaurant area in Mountain View. And they get on stage, and the Q&A happens, and I'm like, this is going to be amazing. Like, the smartest engineers in the world working on the hardest problems, and Larry and Sergey up there. It's going to be just really like fascinating and amazing. And the first question is, hey, the line for Indian food at lunch has gotten really long. Have we considered adding like a second Indian food restaurant? And I was like, by the way, so as you may all know, the food is free, first of all. And I was like, I sat there like, I was like, wow, this guy's gonna get like his head knocked in by Larry and Sergey for asking such a stupid question and wasting everybody's time. And instead we spent 10 minutes talking about whether there should be another Indian restaurant or not. And I just, it was like, so that was probably the biggest culture shock to me of, like at the time, and hopefully going forward, hopefully now and in the future, none of my team in Chicago would have like even crossed their mind to say something like that, or take up the rest of the company's time with something like that. And it was apparently, I quickly learned it was common practice in the Valley.
That sounds on. That's probably a good transition to hear a little bit about your move to Twitter and some of the leadership roles you took on. Did you do anything to try and change the predominant engineering-led culture at Twitter? Did you find a way to embrace it? How did you think about that in your leadership path?
Well, so there's a couple different axes to the answer to that question. On the one hand, I always wanted us to be a technology company at Twitter, and always kind of talked about, look, I want us to be a technology company, not just a media company. I want us to be a technology company that's in the media business. We'll be able to get better engineers. We'll be able to, innovate on interesting things more quickly, and the kinds of companies we acquired that built out some of the Twitter platform stuff that after I left was gotten rid of were awesome technology companies. But the way I thought about the culture was, when I became CEO, I got 10 people from around the company who worked in all different aspects of the company and were at different levels of leadership. I got the VP of Biz Dev, I got I got ICs on the engineering team, I got people who were, account execs, on the advertising team, et cetera. So there were 9 or 10 of us from very diverse backgrounds and very diverse parts of the company. And we built out a set of core values that we decided going into this, we're going to be the way we would run our business and the way we'd make decisions and the values we would look to when we had like conflict in the company and we're trying to figure out, what to do. We wanted these to be things that would help us make decisions and things that would help us think about, if I was an engineer, this is something I know that the people in sales also understand and think about. And if I was in sales, this is something I know that the people in the SREs, the site reliability engineers, also think about and internalize. And we spent a great deal of time on that. And I led that team, and we spent probably 4 months on it and rolled these out. And they were great. And the company uses them to this day. They were, we looked at core values from other kinds of companies and what didn't we want to do. And we knew we didn't want to do for whatever reason, the United States airline companies are the worst at this. You get on the flight and the CEO comes on and goes, here at United Airlines, we believe in integrity and honesty. And you're like, okay, great. Whose core value is not integrity, right? So it doesn't help you do anything or think about anything. Or by the way, and everyone knows it's a joke because here's 5 instances where you spun us on something. And so we tried to make our core values things that helped us think about how to make decisions, So one of our core values was seek diverse perspectives, because I constantly told my managers and directors and VPs at Twitter, the best decision makers go gather feedback from the team before they make the decision, because they have all the context for the decision that needs to be made. Or they know that they're not the right person to make the decision and the team should make the decision. So, that was one. And, you could always tell when people hadn't gathered feedback before making some arbitrary decision that made the team miserable. Another one was we decided that don't be evil at Google wasn't something we loved, because you could always say that the next incremental, slightly less ethical decision you made wasn't evil. Well, we're going to put more ads on the page so you don't see any organic search results right now until you scroll down. That's not really evil. I mean, there's, we're just trying to add another $1 billion to the bottom line. So we're like, that's not really helpful. It's just kind of this abstraction, almost like integrity. So we came up with grow our business in a way that makes us proud. And what we meant by that was we used this as the marker was, hey, is this something I'm going to go home and tell my family or my partner or my kids, guess what we were able to do today? And if it's not, then let's not do it. And I remember early on, after we rolled out the core values, and we were just growing our revenue. I mean, I think our revenue in 2010 was $250,000. And then by 2015, it was $2.2 billion run rate. But at the beginning of 2011, you're coming off a 250K or something year. And Budweiser came to us and said, hey, we'll, for the Super Bowl on February 1st, we'll pay you $1 million to turn the Twitter bird into a Budweiser bottle for, the Bud Light Bowl or whatever stupid thing happens during the Super Bowl. And we're like, well, that's 4x last year's revenue, basically for no work. So it's all profit. We don't have to run the ads in any feed. Easy, 4x last year's revenue. And we got around the table and we're like, look, is this something we're going to be if we do this, what else are we going to sell down the river? We're going to sell out our logo to Budweiser for the Super Bowl? Is this? And we ran it through that core value. And we're like, am I going to go home and tell my kids, guess what I accomplished today? I turned the logo of my company, into a beer bottle for $1 million. So we didn't do it, and we decided we're going to be super psyched we made this decision, and let's always remember that we made this decision.
I love that.
That's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's awesome. And it's a great, it has me curious, what decisions are you most proud of that you made while leading Twitter?
Oh my God. I don't know. There's a bunch I'm proud of, and then there's a bunch, you wish you had done differently. It's always like that. For sure that one. The others that I'm most proud of are, one, we decided we were never going to file an offense patent lawsuit. So irrespective of the patent portfolio we had, and we had a great one, we're never going to sue somebody for licensing fees for violating a patent we have. We're only going to assemble a patent portfolio for defensive purposes. And we made that decision and we rolled that out publicly, and then had a whole set of IP rules inside the company that would prevent Twitter from ever offensively going after, licensing fees for patents, just because we felt those stifled innovation. Now, that's not necessarily the quote best thing to do in the interests of your shareholders or your fiduciary duty, because you're leaving maybe a bunch of money on the table. But we thought that the patent system in the U.S. had gotten totally out of control, and if we didn't put a step forward and say we were only going to use patents defensively, then other people wouldn't, and no progress would ever be made. So we did that, and a bunch of other companies followed suit. And then, I could go on and on. The one more I'll say is we constantly received requests from governments to hand over information about an account. You can sign up for Twitter with a pseudonym and not your real name, et cetera. And then we have data about maybe your real email address or your phone number that isn't public. And governments around the world, whether it was to get after dissidents or whatever, would frequently ask us for, hey, you need to hand over the information about this account. And if we didn't think that that was a valid legal request, like, for example, these terrorists are sending each other direct messages on a platform about their next attack, and we know that they are, and here's a valid legal request for it. But instead, we thought it was just political opponents going after somebody. We wouldn't hand over that information ever, even under threat of shutting down the service in that country. So there were multiple instances when other companies in the social media space, who will remain nameless, handed over information about users so that they stayed online and active and not shut down in country X, where we did not and got shut down for some period of time. And I would make that same decision over and over again.
Those are amazing anecdotes, and really put the gravity behind what your leadership role must have felt like every morning. You were making incredibly important decisions. You mentioned two things. One, the role of deciding when you have to maximize shareholder value, which is an important conversation right now. And it's also the anniversary of Milton Friedman's work, and there's a lot of conversation around that. And then the role that private sector plays in relationship with government. What's your current thought on, shareholder primacy or the role of stakeholder capitalism, or what do you think business leaders should be doing on that topic?
I'm probably going to say something that will probably get me in trouble with some of my capitalist friends, but I think that, as in Germany, that employees of the company should be on the board. I think that you could easily have some sort of, so that it wasn't gamed. You could have some sort of process by which you said, look, people that have been with the company for more than 2 years, so you don't get some competitor sending somebody across the street to join a board and then quit a year later and come back and tell them everything. If you've been with the company for more than 2 years and the employees themselves vote that, you should be on the board, then the employees get 2 seats, and those seats last for some number of years. I think that's an important way to keep, management in check and make sure that they're doing everything in the interests of the shareholders and the employees. I think that too frequently in some companies, the employees are sort of last on the list of the stakeholders, and for me, they were always first. So I think that's something that should happen. Again, it's probably not popular amongst some of my friends. And then the second thing that is going to become more and more important for CEOs, for both better and for worse, is it's going to be much more important to not only know what's going on, but be connected to and stay in contact with your senators and Congress people and the White House. I remember maybe in the middle of 2011, I was in my money management team, and that was not always the case at all. Even for us at Twitter, I was in the middle of my Monday management team meeting, maybe in spring of 2011. I'd just become CEO at the end of 2010. And, my assistant comes in the room and goes, hey, there's a phone call for you. I'm like, tell him I'm back. It's the middle, there's always a phone call for me. We're in the middle of our Monday management team meeting. I'll call back and whatever. And she, she whispers, it's the White House, And I was like, how do you know? Did someone call and say, it's how do you even know it's the White House? but it was Valerie Jarrett from the White House, Obama's chief of staff. And I remember thinking, like, what does she want to talk to me for? I didn't do anything. But we were just naive about how, the role, it seems obvious in hindsight, but it wasn't at the time. You're like, the role you're playing in global politics and the geopolitical spectrum and, at large was just unclear to us at the time. There were little hints of that, like, here and there, but it wasn't as obvious as it looks in hindsight. And we just had to become more and more and more engaged with our national political leaders. I don't know, for those of you who didn't watch any of the Senate or congressional hearings with the social media leaders, the lack of understanding of how these platforms work among our elected representatives is shocking. I mean, it's like extraordinary. And I would go to Washington and sit down in these meetings and think like what? The questions you would get, like, why don't you just use AI to filter out the bad tweets? Like, I don't even know how to answer that. You're like, what? So anyway, it's just going to be more and more important. There's going to be a bigger focus on regulation going forward. So to the extent you don't do that, it's going to be your competitors who do it, and they're going to point at you as the problem. You can see it happening now with Apple and Facebook and Google. We're not the bad guy; they're the bad guy, and that's going to get worse and worse.
Yeah, I think we're all seeing that right now. And obviously the headline of today was for us to dive deep into this topic of how social media and online engagement are shaping the world. As you think about it, what things do you think the leaders and the organizations that are driving social media and online engagement, what should we be doing, and organizations of all kinds be doing differently? And what do you think is working?
I just think that all of these companies, and I'm referring to really all of them as broadly as possible, need to do a lot more and get a lot more overzealous and overcorrect for eliminating misinformation and trolls and hate speech and the amplification of misinformation from platforms. So, and one way to do that is to stop. We sort of had this naive belief back in the day that, the beauty of this platform is it gives everyone a voice, and the smallest voice in the world now has the ability to reach just as many people as the biggest voices in the world. But that's been abused, obviously, by trolls and others. And I think that the naive notion that you can treat all accounts equally has to go away. There's no reason that an account that started on Twitter today that doesn't have a profile photo or a verified phone number or a real email address or anything else that's, Bob 1234556 should be able to amplify or dive into a conversation or broadcast as widely as the, ESPN account, right? Like something we know is the ESPN account. It's been on the platform for years. It's got millions of followers. It just causes all sorts of problems, and they shouldn't be treated the same way. Why hasn't that happened yet? Because where do you draw the line on how you treat things differently? But there are lots and lots of decisions you can make and lots of incremental decisions you can make, and you can fine tune those knobs and dials as you go to do that. And I think all of these platforms need to do a better job of that and start to overcorrect, or look, to the extent they don't do it, they're just going to get dragged in front of these legislative bodies and regulatory bodies, and decisions are going to be made that they're really not going to like.
Yeah, that's an interesting follow-up, which is, either each company makes these decisions on their own and they go the right direction, the companies come together and set some new frameworks for how this is going to work, and that's self-regulation, or the government might ultimately regulate this. Which of those paths do you think is most feasible at this point?
Well, the most likely is that the government start to regulate them. They're not going to come together, and and decide to jointly do things in a similar fashion. They're just not. So I think the most likely outcome is that they pursue different paths. And you've seen some, Twitter doing some things and Facebook doing some different things, and YouTube doing some third things. I think they'll pursue different paths, and it will result in regulation that none of them like. But that also goes broadly for Apple and Amazon and Google as well. which is sort of this next sphere outside social, but certainly impacted by search results and the kinds of product reviews people make on Amazon and everything else that have all sorts of social implications. So I think their decisions are going to be made that none of them like, and that probably aren't the right decisions. But again, it's because once you go and talk to these folks and you understand how far apart our understanding of these platforms are from their understanding of these platforms, there's no way they're gonna make the right regulatory conclusions.
If you were a regulator, do you have an idea of what bill?
Well, I have lots of ideas. Let's see. I told you could ask me anything. Look, I think that the fact that Apple takes a 30% charges 30% for everything that happens, subscriptions, sales, et cetera, on their platform. It's like, if you look at usury laws on on loan sharks, that's above and beyond what the loan sharks in New York are envious of what Apple's vig on any sale and subscription. That's a monopoly that's leveraging their monopoly to take advantage of people in an uncompetitive way, and it couldn't be more obvious. The fact that that isn't the very first thing that's happened shows you that these regulators don't have a almost remarkably limited understanding of what's going on. There's no way you can charge 30% if you're not leveraging a monopoly. It's just impossible.
That's a good transition to what Ben hit on, which is we got Oracle negotiating with the U.S. government right now to buy TikTok. Pontificate on that. What do you think is going to play out?
I mean, who knows? I just don't know. I'm surprised it wasn't Microsoft. I really think Satya Nadella has done such a great job running that company. He's made some just super smart acquisitions. I mean, all of the decisions that he's made have been so and especially if you compare them to the 10 years prior decisions that were made at Microsoft and the acquisitions that were made at the time. His decision making is awesome. The company morale there is through the roof. His acquisitions have been great. He certainly got the money to do it. So I'm surprised and don't really know what happened behind the scenes that caused Oracle to get it instead of Microsoft. Oracle has no idea how to run one of these companies, and Larry's a really, 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 really smart guy, and so is his team. But running a company like this and running a database and database services company are about, are like, I don't know, running a lawn service and flying to the moon. They're not the same. So I don't know what's going to happen there and how that's going to go down, but it's there's probably going to be a tough transition.
Tough transition sounds like the right brief summary of what might go on under those hoods for a little while.
They both use computers is about where the similarity ends between the tech stacks and the cultures and everything else there. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I predict some difficulties along the way.
It'll be fun to see when I saw someone tweet that the videos that start coming out on TikTok might be reminding people to renew their HR SaaS subscriptions. We don't really know what deal we got.
We'll see how popular those are.
Yeah, exactly. You said ask anything, so I'll ask because there are comments about it. What role do you think social media should be playing in this election, and what can all of us who are actively engaged civic citizens do to make sure we have an active role of social media that is appropriate in our civic discourse?
I just think that the platforms themselves need to do a much, much better job of squelching misinformation and preventing it from being amplified. Look, you're not going to prevent somebody from listening to a voice they want to listen to. If people think that Alex Jones from InfoWars is like the smartest guy in the room and knows a bunch of things that nobody else on the planet knows, despite every sort of historical fact that's been exposed about him, then they're going to go watch that, and they should be able to go watch that. But the platform doesn't have to let them amplify it or rebroadcast it or share it to another 4,000 people, or let it go without being labeled as like, this is just obvious, this is wrong, this is known to be false. And I just think that the lack of getting more and more aggressive on that is leading to the rise in the number of people who are these QAnon believers and promoters of these bonkers conspiracy theories. I think the platforms need to step up and do something about that. You can't say you can't just say, oh, we're just a platform, which is what they always say. I mean, we used to have debates about this in the Twitter boardroom. And my position on that was always, well, we're not. Like, we're not just a phone company. Because if you get on the telephone and have a conversation about, I beat my pet, I beat my dog to within an inch of its life, the phone company doesn't know you're saying that, and the phone call goes on and on and on. If you post that to Twitter, we take it down. If you post a video of you doing that, we take it down. So we are editing content. So to say like, oh, we don't edit content is just nonsense. We do take down illegal content. We take down content we deem as violent. So I just think that that's sort of a cop, or not sort of, it's a total cop out to say, well, we're just a platform. Like, look, you've made money by enabling people to broadcast all this information and share information widely and without limits. And now that there's a responsibility that goes along with that you're not facing, and you need to step up.
There's an important conversation this week about boycotting certain sites, and lots of folks around the country talking about that. What else do you think those of us who don't work for platforms but care and are engaged in this conversation, what should we be doing?
I mean, this comment I'm about to make is going to be taken out of context and posted, so please don't do that. But if it happens, I'll just be beat up for it anyway, and I'm just going to say it. Boycotting something for a day is not going to okay, great, I didn't use my account for 4 hours. It's not going to do anything. It's just not. People want profound change, but aren't willing to make the investment themselves in facilitating that profound change. I want the platforms to do X and Y and Z and make these profound changes. And in order to do that, I'm going to stop using it for 3 hours, but then I really need to start using it again tomorrow because my new hair care line is launching. So I think it's like a joke to think that you're going to affect beneficial social change without really lifting your fingers. President Obama has made a number of comments about activism and things that are activism and things that aren't activism. And I sort of echo his thinking on that. It's going to take a lot more than a one-day boycott of a platform to facilitate change.
I appreciate your comments, and thanks for thinking about this, because we know there's so much conversation around it, and I think it's the right, if we're not having these conversations, we're not going to figure out how to actually drive the social change. And I agree with you on the former president's take on this. I think it's been really insightful. Moving to the last and fun topic, I mentioned at the beginning, but you have this semi-hidden talent, which is you've done a lot of improv comedy, and
it's very hidden. It's an extremely hidden talent. Not a semi-hidden.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't find many videos of it, but I might ask you to tell a joke. But I did find a video where you explained how improv has helped you grapple and explain management issues that crop up. And I'd be curious just to hear a little bit about how you apply improv to being a leader.
Yeah, I'll give you two specific examples. The reason you don't see any videos of it is because it was back in the 80s and 90s. Actually, Steve Carell and I showed up at Second City in Chicago the same day. When I graduated from school, I decided I was going to try to get on SNL. And he and I literally showed up at the Second City Training Center to get into Second City the same day. So he and I and Rachel, Amy Poehler, and all the UCB founders, Upright Citizen Brigade founders, and Adam McKay, we all performed together on stage a ton back in the late 80s and early 90s in Chicago at Second City. So that was a blast.
Wow.
And then I auditioned for SNL twice and didn't get it either time. But to my credit, Steve Carell auditioned for SNL a couple times and didn't get it either. He just stuck with it, and I didn't. My two biggest lessons learned from improvisational comedy in leadership are one, active listening is one of the most important things you can do. When you're on stage in an improv scene, if you're not actively listening to what's going on and instead thinking about some joke you want to make or some preconceived notion about where the scene is going to go, it just doesn't work. And because it's because you're not taking in everything that's been established on stage and everything that people have said on stage and building on it, you're going in some different direction that shows the audience that you're not paying attention. And the same is true if you're a manager and a leader. It's why I always told my managers and leaders, listening is 70% of what great managers do. When you gather feedback for a decision that needs to be made, and then you're, listen. And here's what it boils down to: something really, really simple. If you don't listen, you can't communicate. because you're going to make some decision, and your communication of that decision is not going to take into account the context that your team had, or the thoughts that your team had about how that decision should be made. And so they're just going to think that your decisions are arbitrary and capricious, and it's going to make them miserable. So that's probably thing number one from improv. The second thing is, there's a huge rule number one in improv, like rule number 1, 2, and 3 is something called yes and. And yes and is when someone makes an initiation on stage or declares something to be true on stage in an improv scene where you're making everything up to begin with, the only way to deal with that is to accept it as true and then build on it. And the way and the translation to that into management, again, I said this earlier, is, especially as a leader, look, you have to remember as a leader, like if you're the, and I'll use the example of the CEO. If you're a CEO of a 200-person company, the 201st employee of the company feels very, very far away from you in status. And for them, and should they work up the courage to come and tell you like how screwed up they think something is, or that their perception of something is here's my perception of this thing that seems really, really wrong. Think about how hard that was for them to do, and for you to deny that or ignore it and then defend the status quo is going to create way more misery inside the organization than you think. And you may not see it, and you may not recognize it for weeks or months, but it's going to result in people quitting. It's going to result in lower productivity, and you're just not going to get to the truth as quickly as you need to get to it. I remember was one of my board members, Peter Chernin, who had sort of 40,000 or tens of thousands of people reporting to him at News Corp back in the day when he was COO there. He had someone in the audience ask him one day at this management panel, how do you know, since you've got so many people working for you, if somebody does something great in Singapore, how do you find out about that person and make sure they're rewarded? And Peter laughed and said, trust me, the good news finds its way to me right away. And, he laughed and then said, like, it's the bad news you need to make sure it gets to you quickly. And if people tell you something, you ignore it, or you say, no, that's not true. And, again, you don't do yes and accept this thing they perceive to be true. You may disagree with it, but they perceive it to be true. It's the job of leadership to correct mistakes quickly when they happen. It's not the job of leadership to prevent mistakes from happening. And if you don't make it easy for people to tell you the truth or tell you what they believe to be true or perceiving, you're not going to find out about those mistakes quickly, and you're not going to be able to correct them quickly.
That's fabulous sage advice. And I think it resonates no matter what stage you're at, whether you're team of 5, team of 200, team of 1,000 and onward. When I know you parlayed your improv skills or perhaps just that reputation a bit to earn a very cool role as a consultant on a favorite show of so many people in the audience with Silicon Valley. So a question for that. What moment or part of the show mimicked startup life most specifically for you? Like
everything. There were moments in the show that there were 2 things in the show that were explicitly similar to something I went through and experienced personally. I won't say what one of them was to protect the guilty, but just endlessly. I mean, endlessly. It happened over and over and over again. The funny thing, I'll tell you a couple funny things about being in the writer's room on Silicon Valley, because it's all these comedy writers, and they're some of the best comedy writers in the world because HBO paid really well. So you had one of the writers from 30 Rock was in the room. The Alec Berg, the showrunner, is the executive producer of Curb Your Enthusiasm in the last 2 seasons of Seinfeld. Mike Judge, the head writer from Arrested Development. So great writer's room. And they just thought it was endlessly funny that every time they went up to Silicon Valley and talked to companies, they would go into, Yelp and interview people at Yelp and like, hey, why do you like working here? And, well, here at Yelp, like, we're changing the world. We're like doing this and this and this and this and this and this. And then they'd go up to the next floor of the building to DocuSign and like, tell us why, you love working here at DocuSign. Here at DocuSign, we're changing the world. We're getting rid of all the paper that's out there and blah, 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 making everything electronic. And they just thought like they loved it so much they would like look forward to going and asking this question so that people in the most weird, trivial, seemingly trivial companies could tell them how they were changing the world. And they're like, don't you guys talk to each other and realize, you all say that? Because it's really weird. And by the way, you're not. So that's probably one of my favorite moments in that room. And then the second was there was a company that had sent us, I'll just name it, Soylent sent us a case of Soylent, and we passed it around the table and tried it. And just let this be a lesson to people sending their product to comedy writing teams. The writers in the room decided to create a part of an episode where Guilfoyle, one of the engineers, built a competitor to Soylent called Guilfoylent, but it ended up being like 12 minutes long, and they had to cut it out of the episode because it was too long. But so you have to beware of sending product samples to comedy writing teams, because they may take in a different direction than you wanted.
That might be the most important takeaway today for all of the product developers on the site. But that resonated so much for me. I had to actually stop watching Silicon Valley while going to, my husband and I used to watch it before going to bed, but it rang so true to the hardest shit I was working through when starting Guild, that we made a rule that we only watched it like on weekends. But if I went to bed, I would like have all these nightmares and dreams about whatever the episode had just been applied to my current entrepreneurial journey. So you guys nailed it.
Yeah, I'll tell you one last thing about it. I had probably 20 or 30 people come up to me over the course of the two different, I worked on season 3 more than the last season, but the last season a little bit. And over the course of season 3, while it was broadcast and people were seeing it, I had maybe 20 or 30 people come up to me and say, look, I know that you told them about XYZ and that's this thing in the show. And I would honestly be like, that has absolutely nothing to do with XYZ, like literally nothing to do with it. And that happened, 20 or 30 times. So everyone thinks they've got these unique experiences and traumas that they're going through, and it turns out they're not.
That sounds like the human experience. That sounds about right, or the entrepreneur experience. Well, as we wrap up, it's a hard time to be an entrepreneur. I just learned that you had invested in Modern Health at Guild. We just started using Modern Health, so thrilled that you guys are sponsoring products like that. But I think it's important in every conversation that I'm having right now, and I want to honor it today, that it's a hard time to be an entrepreneur, to be a human. Everyone's struggling right now, whether it's parents or caregivers or people just who are single and trying to make sure they don't feel lonely and isolated right now, or people who are missing their communities. So any parting words to start from the earlier conversation? It's always hard, and it's especially hard right now. So any thoughts and parting words for folks who are navigating that journey?
Yeah, 100%. I said earlier, your job as a leader is to make sure your team understands what you understand. And what you just said is something I think everybody knows and internalizes, like, this is really, the pandemic, the fires and the smoke in the West, the hurricanes in the South and the East. I kind of feel like some force is trying to get us all to move to Lawrence, Kansas, where a few well-placed tornadoes will take us all out. But we don't always say it to the team, So as leaders, when you're having all hands meetings, or you're talking to your team in a virtual stand-up, it's important to highlight, like, look, I know this is like a grind right now, and people are on the verge of like breaking down, and I'm like about to lose my mind. Like, you're not alone. We just have to stick together and be resilient. And this is not permanent. It's not going to end tomorrow, and it's not going to end next month, but it's going to end, and we're going to come out the other side of it, and we're going to be more resilient and tough. And we just have to do that together, because if we try to do it alone, we're going to throw ourselves out a window. Just saying that to your team and letting them hear you say that is worth its weight in gold. Because like a lot of people feel like, I'm dealing with this thing that all these other people don't seem to be having to deal with. And why is it so easy for them and so hard for me? It isn't so easy for them. But if you don't say it, they don't know that you're feeling it. So I think that's my, final sort of bit of advice.
I love that. And again, thank you for your firm and others who are investing in great technology and great services that are also helping companies do this. So just want to give that parting word. And this was such a fun conversation. Thanks so much for your vigor and your transparency. It's a real delight for me to get to spend the time with you. And I know everyone watching is having an equal amount of fun.
Awesome. Thanks for helping out with us, Rachel. I sincerely appreciate it. And good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thanks. Take care.